You get the gist. Welcome. How's it going, you guys? Tonight we're shooting out the Roland Juno-6 versus the Roland Alpha Juno-2. And this has been a live stream I've been dying to do since I started this channel, checking out synthesizers, because this is one of the most legendary synthesizers of all time. And the Alpha Juno-2 is probably one of the most maligned synthesizers of all time. Even though they both have the Juno name, it seems like when this synthesizer came out 3 years later, 1985, it really disappointed a lot of people. The obvious reason is it doesn't have all the knobs and faders on it. And so I'm remedying that with a retroactive MPG 50 Mark II. However, there are other programmer and even free editor options for controlling an Alpha Juno. We're going to jump into the oscillators, comparing those. We're going to check out the filters and everything like that. We're going to check out every single function of both of these synthesizers and really try to compare them like to like and say, okay, can we empirically make any judgments about how the Alpha Juno-2 sounds versus the Juno-6? But first, I want to just talk about the street price you can expect to pay for one of these bad boys. So as of today, you can more or less expect to pay about $2,050 for one of these with shipping. So $2,050, right? And then an Alpha Juno without the programmer is about $580 with shipping. Again, prices are from the recording of this video today. If you want to get the original programmer that came with it, that's about $750. However, Retroactive's programmer, in my opinion, feels more premium. It has more premium features like patch memory and the random patch generator. And you can get one of these bad boys for about $600 plus shipping, which I think is about $30. And as my homie Dubstation Zero rightly always points out, you can even get something like a Novation Zero Mark II, and those hover about like $150 on the used market. So what's interesting is even if you factor in a programmer that costs more than the actual synthesizer, right, you can expect to pay about $1,200 for all of this goodness right here. So that's not that bad when you consider a Juno-6. You're going to pay about $2,050 for one of these guys. That's a difference of 1.7 times more, also known as about the cost of a Korg DW8000. So with that in mind, it's and like Terry's saying in the chat right now, you can sometimes get really good bargains on Alpha Junos. I'm just going off the prices of on Reverb today, but you could sometimes snag these at a really great discount, whereas the Juno 6 and 60, those are always going to be more expensive premium synthesizers. So it's still not quite half, but 1.7 times more expensive to buy a Juno 6 than an Alpha Juno. So for most people, if it turns out after this live stream that these two synthesizers sound close enough that you could substitute this for that, what a great deal that would be. Now, on the other hand, we are some snobs in this community, right? Can I get some scum snobs in the chat? The fact of the matter is we really care about those little differences that accumulate into the magic that makes a synthesizer sound great. And so I'm not going to be kind to the Alpha Juno just because it's cheaper and we all love value. The truth is, if it doesn't sound as good as the Juno 6, I'm not going to tell you it does. So with that, I would just like to welcome everybody here. Welcome everybody here, whether or not this is your first time seeing one of my videos or you're here every week. We always do a live stream Wednesdays at 9. Can I get a scum cheers in the chat? I appreciate you guys so much. Okay, now let's kind of zero out these synthesizers. So the first thing we need to do is just turn the chorus off on both, turn the release off on both, and we'll set the volume, the VCAs to gate on both, and then we should be pretty close, to volume matched perfectly oscillators. And YouTube audio compression, if you hear some weird noise at the top of the sound of these oscillators, that's the YouTube compression. I can't do much about that. It actually handles more complex sounds better than it handles less complex sounds like a sawtooth wave. And we do have an oscilloscope today so that you guys can actually visualize the differences here. So I'm going to just compare these two sawtooths real quick on middle C. One thing right off the bat is how similar these sound, don't they? Right? Slight subtle differences, but nothing to write home about. Interestingly, all of the Junos are a little bit different. And in this case, we've got that 4-stage stepped high pass filter. So on the Juno-6, we actually have an analog high pass. And what's cool about that is on the Alpha Juno, when we actually put it on 0 of 4 possible values, we get a bass boost. Versus it's a very substantial bass boost. So we actually need to set it to 1 to match the oscillators. So let's just compare the octaves now. So pretty much identical, actually, which I was shocked by. I was expecting there to be more of a difference between the digitally controlled oscillators in here and over here. Now, we're going to dive into everything, guys. So, bear with me if this stream takes a while, because really we're going to get super granular and nitpicky about things. If this is your first time watching my channel, by the way, I recommend going back and watching a little bit of an easier video. This is for the truly deplorable among us who are addicted to synthesizers in a way that is probably certifiable. So Jerome says, I've noticed the oscillators beating more against each other on the Juno-6, noticeable if you play octaves. So let's do that. Let's play an E octave. Almost goddamn identical. Let's go up an octave. So we've already got our first NCO conspiracist in the chat. Aquit, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. No, the Alpha Juno is not an NCO synth. That is a rumor that's gone around. And I've actually got into some pretty good debates with my friend Euro DJ in the chat about this. This is not a digital oscillator synthesizer. That is persistent misinformation. Roland would not be able to put out a digital oscillator that was any good until 2 years later with the D50. And 2 years back then was huge in terms of time. This was a budget synthesizer, right? This was not them, pioneering what at the time was new technology, digital technology, which required very powerful processors. That's just not what was happening here. But it's interesting that I think because of that a lot of people were disappointed with the synth when it came out in 85 for various reasons. And the fact that the wave shape, so if I go through the wave shapes real quick, we're just starting on a sawtooth wave. You can get these much more interesting waves. It's almost like it sounds like a digital vocal formanty thing, but that's not the case. I've done aliasing shootouts with this to try to see if there's aliasing. And there just isn't. It's unfortunately, it just is misinformation that this is an analog. There's something less than analog about the synthesizer. The wave shaping circuit is brought up a lot. At the end of the day, what we're looking at here is an analog synth. If someone's got some really great info that they can share with me that contradicts that, I will update my opinion in a heartbeat. But I've yet to this day to see any concrete evidence that there's some sort of like a digital oscillator chip inside of this bad boy. Very slight differences on the oscilloscope, but nothing to write home about. Now let's get interesting. If we jump over to this square wave, let's see what that sounds like. So, what are you guys hearing? So there's a little bit more difference. You could probably see it in the oscilloscope, potentially. It is very, very subtle that the square wave on the Juno-6 is actually less of a square wave. The Alpha Juno square wave is more of a pure square wave where it's a flatter top and bottom there, whereas on the Juno-6, it's actually a little bit of that sawtooth harmonic content is making its way. It's not as pure of a square wave. So in that way, I hate to break it to you guys, if you care about square wave purity laws, then the Alpha Juno actually has the Juno-6 beat, which is crazy to say out loud. But it's that is hilarious, Aquatic. It's actually the case that the Alpha Juno has a little bit of a cleaner wave. Let's check out the pulse wave next. So we need to put the PWM into manual, and then we can match that pretty good. I could probably get it even closer if I spent a little bit more time just really dialing in that amount. So, very, very close. Now, we don't have the ability to manually set this narrow pulse on the Alpha Juno. We have 4 settings. We have square, pulse, and then pulse with modulation, right? So that's different depending on what you're using. We do have different settings when it comes to the sub-oscillator, interestingly. So that's already there. Let's go ahead and now put the pulse with modulation into LFO mode. I'm going to set the rate to 50. And we'll do the same thing over here. Pulse with modulation mode. Interestingly here, we have a PWM rate and a PWM slider. So if I am understanding that correctly, yeah, we actually have more control. Again, the Alpha Juno is actually superior in this way. Don't worry, there's some ways in which the Juno-6 is going to come out on top. So I'm front loading this with the Alpha Juno having some real strength. We have a separate LFO, so we can use that other LFO to do other interesting things on the Alpha Juno. On the Juno-6, the 60, 106, they all share the same LFO. I mean, they're almost identical. One thing that you shouldn't worry about if you're not familiar with phase is when you're looking at that silly little oscilloscope over here, right? When you're looking at that, just don't forget that phase up and phase down doesn't matter, right? So if it's the same shape, but it's up or down, many things can influence that, but it's sonically the same. 40 Thieves, welcome. How's it going? Can I get a scum cheers in the chat for 40 Thieves, one of the longest running fans of this channel? So, cheers to you, brother. That's right, Jerome. It's got a separate PWM LFO like the Poly 6, which we shot out 2 weeks ago. Really interesting how those are two synthesizers that on paper should be virtually identical, and they're so different. And then here we have two synthesizers that reputation and on paper seem like they should be so different, but they actually sound really, really similar. It goes to show that features and specs and stuff don't matter as much as implementation. So LFO, basically PWM sounds in the ballpark. I think if I'm at like 95 almost percent, nope, actually it is just, it's very, very similar with, I would throw so far that we've heard into the trivial category. I'm a snob for little differences, but these are like minute. Let's compare the sub-oscillator. So now we turn that up and it's just going to be a square wave, right? I have to do the same thing, oscillator transpose. We're going to turn that off and turn the sub-oscillator on sub-level up. Little bit louder, it seems. Yeah, so the sub-oscillator can actually get a little louder on the Juno 6, so let me just turn that down. There, so about 75% volume on the Juno 6 is actually the max volume on the Alpha Juno. So we have our first real difference that I'm going to say like kind of counts for something. We also only have off 1, 2, or 3 on the Alpha Juno. On the Juno 6 and 60, we have analog control over that sub-oscillator, meaning when I say analog here, I'm just referring to the control so that we've got a smooth, continuous, non-stepped control over that sub-oscillator. So it sounds pretty good, right? Now, on the on our boy, the Alpha Juno, we can actually control the shape of that sub-oscillator. That's it for the sub-oscillator on the Juno 6. We're out of tricks, nothing fun and interesting. Over here, we can go from, you know, to a pulse, to a double pulse. So I don't know if you guys can see that on the stream right here, but it's basically like 2 pulses at the end of the wave shape. See how you can see it on the oscilloscope, actually? That's a pulse. And then I'll shift it to the double pulse. Fascinating wave shape. Then we've got a double pulse, but they're very narrow. Looks like 4 actually on the oscilloscope, and then we have an octave down. So that's 2 octaves down from the main sound. So if I bring in a sawtooth wave, you'll hear, which we can't do on the Juno 6 either. And then we can now actually have a narrow pulse 2 octaves down, which I think blends in sometimes better with a sawtooth than a straight big bad square sub-oscillator. One more time, let's just cover real quick the sawtooths here. And turn the sawtooth on, sub-level off. Right, so they're identical. We'll just go through these wave shapes too real quick. So we go from saw, beautiful saw, virtually identical to the Juno 6, to a step saw. kind of almost is like a pulse, isn't it? And then we have saw width modulation. Which is unique to this synthesizer and very few others. Then we have many pulses. So that thing's like really chewed up. And the idea here, if this sounds weird, is that in 85, Roland was playing catch up behind Yamaha. Basically everybody was, because the DX7 came out. And so what Roland really wanted to do was put out a synthesizer that could sound digital even though it's an analog synth. And I think that's where a lot of the rumors of this being an NCO synth or something like that come from, because it can sound more digital. When you hear sounds like this, you tend to think, that can't be an analog synth, right? And then we have this interesting wave shape. You can see that there's these pulses, and then there's a break, and then more pulses towards the top. Antigua Stephen, I don't know how I got that so wrong. Antigua Stephen, this is a wonderful first analog synthesizer. I love this thing. So just again, we have many, many shapes to play with on the Alpha Juno that aren't there on the Juno-6. And as far as I'm concerned, at the DCO level, we compared oscillator drift. If anybody, why don't we turn the sub on and the saw, which we can do on both of these synthesizers. We're leaving pulse width off, sub off. Let's just do a couple more quick chord comparisons. Sub-oscillator. Oh, I have the sub on. Let me do that instead. I had that wrong. So let's go down here. The oscillator drift is almost identical between the two, which I'm very surprised by. I would have thought that this would have a little bit more analog drift in it, because this uses a, for those of you guys who don't know, again, something that kind of seems like it would make the synth more digital, but this uses a digital clock that's divided down to create its analog oscillators. This uses an analog clock, basically a high frequency voltage controlled oscillator divided down to create its analog oscillators. And there's always this little debate in the synth snob community, can I get some scum snobs in the chat, about crystal oscillators versus high frequency voltage controlled oscillators. Is there a this one drift more? In this particular case, the answer is no. And by the way, this isn't the only Juno that has that crystal oscillator. The famed Juno-106 as well has a crystal divide down oscillator. So it uses a digital source to create its analog oscillators as well. So again, I think this synthesizer's just been maligned for so long. So many people are, and Jerome, to your point, I like the PWM saw a lot too. I don't use the other shapes as well. To me, they are very bright and harsh. So with that, let's go back to just a sawtooth wave. Turn the sub-oscillator. But you know what? Fuck it. Let's leave the sub-oscillator on. It sounds meaty and big, right? A little bit more harmonics. So what we're going to do next is check out the filter, okay? Now, the filter in the Juno-6 is an IR3109 filter chip, which is the same filter that went into the Jupiter 8. And you can hear it. It sounds awesome. The Alpha Junos, JX8P, JX10, Super Jupiter Rev 5 and on, not the Rev 4, all contain the IR3R05 filter chip, which is the update version of the Roland filter sound. And they're very similar, but we're going to hear some differences. Implementation is huge too. So the thing that you'll notice about, or that's said time and time again about the Alpha Juno, is its filter does not fully self-oscillate. The Juno-6 does. So that off the bat is a big difference. But to me, there's actually a much bigger difference between these filters that matters more than that people don't talk about. And what that difference is resonance compensation. So independent of filter architecture, there's also kind of like a Z factor of how much the input signal is actually increased as you crank the resonance, which helps retain the signal to resonance ratio better. The way to test this on a synthesizer is put the frequency of your filter above human hearing, which it is on both of these synths right now, and then crank the resonance. So the resonant peak will be above human hearing. And what that will do is give you an indication of like, how much bass do you lose? How much signal do you lose? So let's do that right now. I'm going to start. Lose about, what is that, about half volume there on my meter? Let me see if I'm looking at that correctly. I think it's about half volume difference there. Let's do the same test over here. Whoa. Huge difference in volume there, right? This is what the resonance maxed on both synths. This is what the Juno-6 sounds like. That's resonance cranked, and it's like the signal has disappeared. The Jupiter 6 that came out before the Alpha Junos, of course, has the same sort of sound, where as you crank the resonance, you really lose a lot of it. And so Roland seemed to be going in this direction. To me, to my ears, I don't know about you guys, there's always like, I'm going to prefer the synth that has more resonance compensation, more of a boost or drive into the filter as you crank the resonance so that you retain that signal. It gives it that beautiful crunch to it. But I think back in 1985, again, digital was all the rage. People wanted synths that sounded thinner, brighter, more metallic, like the DX7. And I think Roland overcompensated and gave people what they wanted for in a short-sighted sort of way, where we get these synths that have not enough body when you crank the resonance. You lose some too on the Juno-6, but compared to the Alpha Juno, the difference is pretty astounding. So let's go ahead and do some filter sweeps. One interesting thing is attack decay over here on this synthesizer is closer to about 75% of the maximum attack and decay that you would use to get that sort of a sound. The Alpha Juno-2 and Alpha Juno-1 use 6-stage envelopes, which means that you could do more complex stuff. Plus, it's got velocity and aftertouch. There's a lot going on in the Alpha Juno-2 that's not present on the Juno-6. But this should be pretty close to be able to allow us to do some filter sweeps. So envelope all the way up, frequency all the way down. It's about 75% on these faders. And then just same thing, envelope all the way up. Select the right envelope and then cut off all the way down, and we should be able to do some nice filter sweeps. Let's start with the Juno-6. That's interesting. Might have a little dirt in there. There we go. That's closer. I'll just match that just in case there's any difference. Let's increase the resonance to about 25% here, and we'll do something like that over there. We'll see which is how close they are. Fascinating. What are we hearing, guys? Whoop. So at 25% resonance, what's really interesting is we're hearing more of a resonant peak actually from the Alpha Juno and a little bit more bass, which is fascinating. Let's bring it up to about 50%, meaning the difference from 0 to 25% on this slider with the Alpha Juno is pretty substantial compared to the difference on the Juno-6, the way that resonance is tapered. So we'll bring it up to 50% on both and see what we're at there. So to match these, I think I need about 60% resonance on the IR3109, the Juno-6, versus 50% resonance on the Alpha Juno. So again, they've sort of tapered the Alpha Juno filter so it gets more resonant quicker, maybe so that you can get to that sweet spot in between complete oscillation and, you know what I mean? Because like a lot of it's right in that little spot right there. They are very close, Aquatic. Analog Rich, welcome. Turnian, thank you very much. I appreciate you. So as far as I'm concerned, 50% or so and 60% on the Juno-60, really no difference to write home about. Again, I'm really surprised. I was expecting them to sound way different. Let's go to 75% on both and see where we're at here. They're very similar again at 75. I think here, honestly, at 25 and 50% resonance, I'd give the edge to the Alpha Juno is actually sounding better. Here at 75, though, I'm starting to hear some stuff that's giving me a little bit more. Also, the increased bass presence that you get from the Juno-6, the increased signal to resonance ratio is really pleasing. It's starting to give it that beautiful sound. The Alpha Juno starting to lose some of that. As an experiment real quick, if you'll humor me, that is, I want to try putting the bass boost on the high pass filter and seeing how that kind of feels, right? Because that might be part of why they added the bass boost circuit into the Alpha Juno, and I believe the 106 as well, to try to like beef up the sound a little bit. So let's try that out. One other little difference here is I'm hearing pretty similar slopes actually to the envelopes, but this one is a little bit more exponential or logarithmic, whatever it is. It has more of a curve so that it holds on to that sound just a little bit longer. So instead of like a straight line, it's got more of a curve to the decay shape, but they're actually closer than I would have thought. Very interesting. MIDI Alchemy, welcome, by the way. I saw earlier that this is your first stream, so welcome. Can we get a scum cheers in the chat real quick for MIDI Alchemy? Thank you for being here. More sizzle on the J6 in the first part of the sweep, but they have the same roundness in the tone in the finish. I also adjusted the cutoff. I'm sorry, the envelope depth, and increased it. The Alpha Juno can go further envelope depth wise than the Juno-6, and I felt like I had maybe compensated a little too much by bringing it down to that. So let me know if you're still hearing that. It's interesting. Sometimes I get a little bit of analog slop between the envelopes on the Juno-6, whereas on that last one, I deliberately sort of offset my hand movement to get a little of that, you know, more analog sound in there. But if I play it perfectly, see, you can still hear sometimes a little bit of a difference, whereas on the Alpha Juno, it's always pretty bang on. But with the bass boost, what I will say is I do hear a difference. The way it, you know, there's a little bit less signal still, even with the bass boost. But the bass boost does help. It's actually boosting those low frequencies, like 75 kilohertz or so, a little bit more than we're getting from the Juno-6. So it sounds kind of beefy in the low end, beefier in the low end than the Juno-6. But in the mids, they're still, it's not quite there, but you know, it's not bad. I think I just increased the decay a little bit more here. Really pretty freaking insanely close at 75% resonance. Now let's take it all the way up to 10, which if we do on this synthesizer will take us too far. So I'm going to maybe go for like 90 and see where we're at with that, and then just keep going there. So we need to dial it back even further because we're starting into that. So let's go with like 80%. Honestly, even 80, right at the tail end, I was able to catch some self-oscillation. So like we have to really split the difference. So from like, we're looking at like 78% here. Let's see. This is the only moment of this whole stream so far where I'm like, Juno-6 has something, right? That extreme resonance, you know, it's starting to really make a difference at 100% resonance on the Alpha Juno. And, you know, we're looking at 78% resonance or so on the Juno-6. At this point, the lack of body in the mid-range of the Alpha Juno becomes apparent. Now, I'm just curious if I go ahead and play, you know, a fun chord. You're right, Synsonic. It does have that almost Oberheim-y sort of character to it, right? With that crazy amount of resonance, you can hear very subtle differences in envelopes too. But Jerome's right. It's the 6 and 60. So does that mean that the envelopes on the 106 aren't as snappy as the envelopes on the 6 and 60? I mean, on that one, on that particular chord, I really didn't hear much of a difference. I know for anybody who's not a scum snob, they're going to be like, there is no difference. Yeah, so it's really interesting. At all the way up to about 75% resonance, which is the most I really use on a synth like this most of the time. It's kind of like 100% resonance here is still at that like 75% mark on the J6. To me, really, the difference isn't even in the character of the filter, which is usually what I care about. And when I say character, I mean the character of the resonant peak, right? You know, there's sharper ones, there's ones that are more sing-songy, there's ones that are more growly, more masculine, more feminine. The Alpha Juno 100% has that Roland signature sound to it. 100%. I'm shocked at how close that resonant peak sounds between the two synths. All I'm really hearing is less signal to resonance ratio on the Alpha Juno. And I'm hearing the difference in the envelopes, which apparently you would hear, you wouldn't really hear the difference if this was a Juno 106, right? So that really makes it hard to want to go for a Juno 106 unless you can get it below street market value for a scum price of, you know, around this. And again, this has velocity and aftertouch, which none of the Junos that came before it had. This has different wave shapes, the ability to do saw with modulation, which of course none of the Junos had before it. This has the ability to do a sub-oscillator 2 octaves down instead of just 1. The list goes on and on with everything you can do with this synthesizer. You've got a separate LFO for PWM rate from the main LFO. You've got 6-stage envelopes with velocity sensitivity that you don't have on the Juno-6. So comparing like for like, the Juno-6 does have a little magic at the very end of that resonance, you know, and again, let's just really be clear here about what I'm saying, because, I mean, is this a good sound? I mean, to your point, MIDI Alchemy, what I'm trying to say is like that sound to me is too much. I'm not going to use that much resonance. I'm much more likely, in this case, you know, swap it into envelope mode here, add some release. We need to do the same thing. Envelope mode, kill the attack, add some release, and we'll leave this at 100%. We've got the bass boost in, which is, in a way it's cheating, but in a way it's just the nature of the architecture, right? But see, that's the thing though, is we get that increased signal. We could turn the volume up a bit, right? You know, and just try to... But the truth is that we still have, I mean, it sounds good. It's mostly comes down to that. And what's interesting is I know the Jupiter 6 has what they call a Jupiter 8 mod. It's supposed to be pretty simple, like adding one resistor or something like that to boost the amount of signal that goes into the filter as you increase the resonance. I wonder if you could do that mod to an Alpha Juno, because if you could, that would fix it. You know, it just, and again, this is to my ears. Some people, let's say those of a more Moog persuasion, right? I'm not here to hate on anybody's personal taste when it comes to legendary analog filters, but, you know, I'm not as much of a ladder filter guy. I like bass. It is what it is. But for someone who wants a more ladder filter-like response, which, to be fair, is actually more vintage, right? If you have a Jupiter 4, it 100% sounds more like an Alpha Juno than it does a Juno 6. It loses a lot of bass. Same thing with my Roland SH2, which is just off camera here. Same thing. That filter, as you crank the resonance, you lose all the bass, right? It's just gone. So, you know, for everybody's like hot on the memory Moog right now and Trigon and stuff like that, Moog ladder filters, Moog Muse, right? This is kind of like a more Moog Muse sounding version of the Juno 6. You know, stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Cheers, guys. Oh, it's so good. Barbs is like, CS70N just chilling up there saying, hold my beer. Boomstar's another cool one. Studio Electronics, really great stuff. Dub Station Zero, a huge champion of their discrete electronics that go into their products. Now we need to move on. So we're going to just kind of go back to where we were. Let's go back to a gate. We'll leave it the VCA on the envelope, but we're going to kill the resonance and bring the cutoff all the way up. Let me just make sure I've kind of got this still pretty close to matched. Let's turn the high pass filter to 1 so we have the same wave shape. Yep, that's, man, they're fucking identical. Actually, it's just even with the high pass filter all the way down, little bit more bass, just a little more bass. We'll turn the release down just a bit, just for. There we go. So just a little more sub-oscillator helps. Now what we're going to do is compare the chorus. So when you buy a Juno, the reason you buy it is because of the chorus, right? It goes from being great to blinding lights when you turn the chorus on, right? I hope to God you guys are listening in stereo. That doesn't sound that different, does it? They are very, very similar. There are differences though. So when I compare, my guess, I did a little test on this before the stream because I wanted to have some clarity on it, looking at some scopes that are just beyond my technical capabilities of figuring out how to get onto the screen while the computer's over there while I'm doing the live stream. So I just wanted to look and see if there was, my theory was the reason the Juno-6 sounds better in our collective memories anyways is because the mix of the chorus is louder on the Juno-6, but that actually is wrong. The mix is pretty much the same on both. So if I turn it off, same deal here. You could hear that they are very, very close in terms of, let me see if I can bring that even down. What is it, like 60? Yeah, 63 maybe. So actually the same. However, when you look at an imager scope, you'll notice that there's more movement. It's actually wider in stereo image. I have no idea what is going on. It's a subtle difference. Like it's an audio engineer, mastering engineer level difference between the width, but it is there that the stereo image on the Juno-6 is just a little bit wider. It's it's actually from, if this is the Alpha Juno, the Juno-6 is like there, right? We're not comparing penises, we're comparing chorus width, right? And that's what I'm talking about, where it's a subtle thing, but it is there. There's another thing I believe I'm hearing, and I wonder if you guys can hear it. I'm going to play a chord. I'm going to play a fucking fifth chord. That way it's not too crazy. Okay, if there is a difference, it might be, and now I feel like I'm just gaslighting myself, but it might be that the shape of the wave that's modulating the pitch on that bucket brigade delay is a little more squared off on the Alpha Juno. Could be, I don't know. But what's really the difference is I hear actually a little bit more pitch depth, so that it's moving the vibrato that's mixed into the signal, which is what gives it that chorused effect. It's moving the pitch a little bit more than on the Juno-6, which is a little bit less. So you can kind of hear it, that it can almost sound a little seasick, or a little closer to a flanger. And it could be bucket brigade delay wear and tear. That's absolutely valid. You know what else? This chorus, if I turn the gate off of, let me just do this real quick for you guys to hear. So if I go over to here we go. Let's just turn this gate off and see if you guys can hear the difference. And I'm going to turn the gate off here, so the oscilloscope's going to go crazy. Can you hear that? That's the Juno-6, and I'm going to mute that. And this is the Juno-2. So much quieter noise. It's not as noisy. It's actually very usable levels. So again, here's the noise from the Juno-6. This is without a noise gate on. Isn't that wild? Isn't that kind of a crazy thing, right? So that's another little detail there, that the Juno-6 has more noise on my particular unit coming through. That's probably what's making now that I think about it, noise increases stereo width. This is an effect that's known with vinyl. So vinyl isn't technically a wider stereo image, but when you listen to it, a lot of people say, wow, it sounds so wide, it sounds so deep. And they're not wrong technically, because vinyl has more noise, and the perception of noise differences in the left and right channel can give you that. So it's actually probably that the chips in this synth are noisier, which is usually considered a fault, that's giving it a little bit more stereo width and really making that difference. So let's go ahead. Did I mute my Juno? I think I had that. What is it? Muted? Yeah, let's turn that mute off. Let's go ahead and check chorus 2, right? So we need to, this is a faster rate chorus. So it seems to be that they calibrated the 50% mark here to be exactly the speed of chorus 1. This is useful too, that like 75% is exactly the maximums here on the envelope. So it's almost like you could see that these incredible engineers over at Roland were like, let's make 75% the sweet spot, like the maximum, but let's let this synthesizer go a little further. So let's see, I'm guessing that something like 75% is going to be close on the chorus, but it could be different. Totally fucking off. We really can't take it that far. Let's take it down to 79. A little slower. Yeah, so it's more like 60%. So it's like 50% and 60% is 50 and 60 here. It's fascinating the way they set this up. So really, if you're buying a Juno because you love that chorusy sound, which is what you're getting a Juno for, if we're being honest here, Alpha Juno has it. I mean, in my opinion, it's probably the better way to go because it sounds just as good to my ears. This is noisier. I mean, if you have to, bring a little noise in. Too much, unfortunately, because we've got the step control here. Little too much to bring the noise in, but yeah, the point is I think chorus wise, they're virtually identical, or you can match them close enough that the differences are kind of trivial. This does sound a little better, but I wouldn't spend the money for that difference. I definitely, Aquatic had a jump start on being able to hear these little differences. And sometimes when I go back and watch these live streams, I hear that YouTube compression has eaten up some of the difference, you know, and I go, oh man, it sucks, because I can definitely hear it right now. If I play it back on my studio monitors, I can hear it. Then when I listen to the YouTube compressed version, I'm like, it's hard to tell the difference. I think in this case, you guys could definitely tell the difference in the resonance compensation. But I had a jump start because I was a mastering engineer, so I've already kind of trained my ear to hear those little differences. Mark Anderson says, BBD noise is a function of the number of stages in the clock rate. I recall 4096 stage device was the big expensive delay chips compared to the 256 stage devices. So I don't know really about that, Mark. So if I was a sommelier, that's where I just failed the test. But that sounds plausible. It sounds like you know what you're talking about. So MIDI Alchemy brings up a point. We've got other settings on the synth that are different than just 50 and 60%. Real quick, if you press both of these at the same time, you get this weird vibrato. it's monaural. Sorry, that word came out a little weird. As opposed to stereo, you can hear the difference. And it's like this weird vibrato thing. It's pretty not that usable in my opinion, but it is there, and we don't have an equivalent on the Alpha Juno. Not a big deal. Let's take the chorus rate really slow, actually. So you're right, it almost has more of like a Dimension D, like stereo widener effect. It's really wide. It's like less lush and more wide when you have it that slow. As opposed to closer, like. They sound similar, but when you slow it down enough, you really. Yeah, it becomes this like stereo widener effect. That's really great and something I wish the Juno-6 could do, you know? Really interesting. MIDI Alchemy says, I noticed on my Sledge that an almost non-existent rate with high depth makes it more of like a binaural thing. And yeah, that is what it sounds like, right? If I crank the resonance more, right? Let's see. It does sound pretty binaural, relatively binaural. We can also take this way the other direction. I mean, I think the Juno-6 is tuned, like if there's something you could say about the Juno-6 in the 60 is that it's almost impossible to make a sound that's bad, right? And when you go with a slow rate chorus, I wouldn't say it's a bad sound, but maybe it's a little alien of a sound. I think it's gorgeous, but I could see how maybe someone who's looking for like a lush chorus goes, well, that doesn't sound lush at all. That sounds like shit. To me, I'm like, that sounds pure and like big, wide, expansive tones. You throw some attack on that, and all of a sudden you've got, you know, something. Really huge soundscape. Now, if you go the other direction, right, then it can get where I would arguably say it sounds bad. Not necessarily if you're into Gesaffelstein, but if you're just like, you know, if you're a fucking jackass, you're high as shit, dicks, you've got a mullet, you're wearing an acid wash denim jacket, you walk into the music store, you're like, give me the new fucking Juno, let me check it out, and you go, better yet, let's put the sawtooth on one of the digital sounding waveforms. You stare at this fucking thing and you go, Jesus Christ, it's fucking digital. You know, like I see how this happened. You look at it and you go, there's just no way that that's coming from an analog synth. It sounds bad. But that's just that the user error. Like it can sound totally like a Juno. And even in like the 75% range, it's a usable palette. It's almost trancier, right? Like almost a proto super saw. If we add some resonance to that. you know, you could see almost like the System 8 looming in the background in a good way. Because you do lose more of that bass, you get more high end. So that kind of gives you that trancier. And it does give, you start to hear that Hoover sound, right? You start to hear it. It's not all the way there, but you can absolutely see how all of a sudden, it doesn't take much. Now let's just, put that into saw width modulation here. We're getting beautiful tones that are not possible on the 6, just, if we put the, that saw width modulation, even if we use the square wave modulation here and we try to kind of get similar to those. We have so much more. To me, that saw width modulation almost sounds like we're getting a free analog oscillator an octave up. Again, you can kind of see, for me this is a lot of fun because you could see like, the JP8000 was on the horizon. Slow chorus setting now. I will say this, that the Juno-6 is just like the lush king. It just... Whoops, sorry. It just sounds so lush and big and warm, sexual. Whereas, I can see why when you go for like big, warm analog pad, right? Your Juno-6 is going to take this one. But when it comes to interesting stuff... is a good example of where, you know, it's can you say, like, for how similar these two synthesizers are. Yeah, of course this has an arpeggio, right? I don't know. It's not the biggest feature difference for me. For some people, you know, the arpeggiator's why they buy a Juno. For me, it's not that big of a deal. It's just going up and down, right? But there is something about how good this sounds every time you go to it, right? It's pretty crazy. I missed some of the chat, so I'm going to try to catch up. I need to have a little bit more of this wonderful Guinness here. Can I get a scum enjoying this deep dive, the deepest of dives into this world here? And I just want to catch up on this. It's I thought I saw someone post something that was really interesting. Chris, welcome. So it's really a fur lining. Love a fur lining. Alex's OnlyFans channel is lush. It is the case that this synth just is lush, right? I would love to be able to tell you that this is quite as lush with the resonance cranked. It's just not quite there. It sounds so fucking good. Let's turn the high pass filter on and boost the volume a bit just to try to... The moment your ear forgets how great the Juno-6 sounds, you just go, oh God, it couldn't sound better than the Alpha Juno. And then it's like, yeah, I guess it could. It's so gorgeous on the Juno-6. I keep saying J6, but I don't want to confuse it with the Jupiter 6, which I think that's the actual designation. It's really in the chords in the middle. At the high end and the low end, they're close enough that it does not fucking matter. It's because you've got that bass boost when you're down low. You've got a little bit of an advantage there. I'm curious, just like where we're at right now. I think there's probably other things to talk about. I mean, we could compare, say, the rate of the LFO, right? So let's just do that real quick, actually. Let's put them both into gate modes. Envelope all the way off, LFO all the way up. Let's do the same thing. So again, interestingly, about 75%. A little bit more, 80%. Yeah, so about 80% on the Alpha Juno is about the same rate that you get on the Juno-6, and then we can just take it further. actually into some interesting filter cutoff, filter FM type territory here, especially if we key follow the filter. Let's see. Yeah, just a fascinating little dive there into some chaos that, you know, again, we're not getting anywhere close to that shit with this synth. Sure, we could self-oscillate the filter, but it's not going to really take us as interesting of a place as the faster LFO. But again, to make the point, like, if you were some jackass and you've got it on the sawtooth and you've got the chorus too high and you've got the, you know, there's more going on. The envelope select here, we've got envelope or gate for the VCA, right? We've got positive or negative on the Juno-6. On our boy over here, we've got gate, envelope, envelope with velocity, gate with velocity. So we've got 4 choices. We've got positive, negative, positive with velocity, and then dyne, which might be some just dynamic gate, something like that. You can take it to where it just sounds like shit. I shouldn't say sounds like shit. I think it sounds awesome. Throw some reverb on this. And then all of a sudden we're back to sanity. So I think that's a good example. Got one more test I want to do real quick. Let's go back to a gate. Let's turn the high pass filter off. Yeah, that's interesting. I can already hear it. Filter all the way up. Let me just make sure I'm not going fucking crazy here. So, sawtooth wave. Looking at the scope. There we go. So that's pretty much, oh man, just lost it. Damn, I think I have to go to patch generator and do an init sound again. There we go. Close enough. What I want to compare real quick is what happens if we turn the sub, we'll leave that at 75%, the pulse width modulation, and on both of them, and then look at the levels. So how much does the Juno-6, what's the word I'm looking for? Titrate or reduce the volumes. There's a word I'm looking for. It's a very simple word right in front of me, but can't get there. To control the gain into that filter. So this is with the pulse width modulation, sawtooth, and sub-oscillator on. Over here we've got interestingly, even with the high pass filter off, you get more signal being fed into the filter. The reason this is important is because Dr. Synthypants, welcome. Dave Serber, welcome, my friend. How's it going? Attenuate. That's the word. That's the word, my friend. Attenuate. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was goddamn painful to have to do in front of the internet. Sorry you guys had to see that. This pushes more oscillator into the filter with all of them on than this does. Now, if you turn the sub all the way up, you probably get something similar. And you definitely get more like buzzy high end here. For whatever reason. But I'm just curious if like doing a filter sweep now. Nah, I think you still lose too much. Yeah, it's still going to have that more hollow sound because there's just so much more resonance going through. This would be a great time, guys, to ask, is there anything else you guys want to know? Like, are there any other things I've missed? Again, we've got velocity and, I mean, one of my favorite things about this synth is Aftertouch, right? So just being able to play a chord. Is that it, touch, or is that? That's not that. Is it this? Yeah, just being able to do Aftertouch on a Juno. Just that one feature alone makes it kind of worth it to have an Alpha Juno comparing the two. I mean, they're both good in different ways, but... Yeah, maybe a little vacuuming's not a problem, you know? Love a good vacuum every now and again. The oscillator envelope on the Alpha Juno-2 is wild. Yeah. Cheers, guys. Turns out the oscillator envelope is on. Yeah, that's another way you can make an Alpha Juno sound bad because... Sorry, just one more thing that the Alpha Juno can do that's completely non-existent on the Juno-6 is you can route this envelope to the pitch of the oscillator, which is over here. Which can be kind of cool for creating some different types of sounds than you would maybe, you know. And by the way, of course, this is how we get sort of that dominator. What the real secret is doing the sawtooth modulation, right? Not that one, this one. It was Eric Persing who created the Hoover Parbs. The story is funny. We actually can find the preset for you. I have it right here. Let's go find it real quick. Might be in memory. Let's try over here. Oh, I love preset M83 dog bark. It's so cute. Oh, Ooh Scary's really good too if you love a good ghost. So good. Okay, so here's the original preset. So the story goes that I think it was for the JV 1080 or something, but Roland was saying they're getting a lot of requests. People were saying, hey, we want more Hoover sounds in synthesizers. And Eric Persing was like, all right, I can do that. I'm the greatest sound designer of all time. I can figure this out. I can figure out whatever the hell that means. So he started researching what they meant. And it turns out that he was the creator of the Hoover because this what the preset was what everybody was modifying to make sounds like Joey Beltram and Dominator and all of those different tracks. It's been used countless. And I mean countless times, like Baby on Fire from Diane Word all the way to The Prodigy back in the early 90s, like such a wide range. So here's the preset, by the way, it's happening. Or maybe I play around here. So that's the preset, right? And you can hear how, you know, if you're doing that. That's the Hoover sound, but you have to modify the envelopes because it kind of does this weird thing. He kind of put it in the synthesizer as a little bit of a joke or a little bit of a like, well, let's just throw this in here, you know. It's kind of like almost the last preset because you got your presets in your memory, you're stored. So this is right at the end of the overwritable memory presets in the synthesizer. Some of them you can't overwrite. And so, you know, I think he just threw it in there as a joke and it ended up creating basically an entire genre in a sense. Ricky Magnum, that's right. So with the price of this, I always say when it comes to talking about price with an Alpha Juno, I feel that it's fair to consider the price of a programmer. Dub will always point out Novation Zero Mark II. You can get those really cheap and they come with like an auto map, or you can get an auto map. Dub can correct me on that one. So that all the knobs and stuff line up to parameters in the Alpha Juno 2. I'm a huge fan of retroactive. If you want to buy a vintage MPG 300, they're about $750. So it is actually cheaper to get an MPG 50 Mark II, and it does have additional features which are really nice. I love retroactive stuff. It feels really premium and helps take this humble synth and make it feel like a very premium experience. Nothing can change the ugly as sin look of this synthesizer compared to one of the most Elvira synths of all time, right? But I think this is, for $1,200, this is a hell of a poly synth. And of course, you can just plug a MIDI cable into the back of this and just use a free programmer if you're not afraid of computers. But I know a lot of the people who watch this channel are like, I am not going near a fucking computer. And I think the MPG 50 makes it really great. So I'm at a bit of a crossroads, guys. I'm in trouble because I really believed in that way that us synth people can delude ourselves. That what I did when I bought this Juno-6 was I bought a synthesizer that would be cool to check out on the channel. It had some, problems. I had them repaired. I had a MIDI kit put into it. And I'm like, and then I'll be able to sell it and make a little bit of money, just like that, like a fucking Italian. But the thing is, having compared this with the Poly 6, first off, the Poly 6 and the Juno-6 are so different as to not really be able to say, like, if you have one, you've got the other one covered. The Alpha Juno-2 is way more similar to the Juno-6 than I was expecting. However, I want to know, and I'm going to put the question in the chat. I want to know, and I'm going to put the question in the chat over here. So I'm going to jump back over, bring up a little bit of music. Are they close enough that you just can't justify owning both? That's really the question. So let's put that in the chat. Are these two synths similar enough that you can't justify owning both? Question mark. Let's just start the poll. I think that's a good poll to go for. We shall see what you guys think. Always point out a stereo opping controller too. Those you could get for like, what, $400 or so, $500. With that, I'm not gonna, for me, the stereo opping programmers are good in a pinch. They're not gonna compete, with just the depth you get and the one knob per function that you get with the retroactive stuff, or even the MPG 300. I have a MPG 1000 right there. I don't know if you guys could see that. That's the D50 programmer. And you do have a little bit more noisy potentiometers or sliders and stuff that you have to deal Trader to the Living, welcome. I've never played the 2. Is it a lot better than the Alpha? The Alpha Juno-2 is just the Alpha Juno-1 with 12 extra keys. It's got 61 keys instead of 49, and velocity and aftertouch. They are the exact same synth under the hood, and in fact, if I'm correct, I think both the Alpha Juno-1 and the MKS-50, which is the rack mount version, respond to velocity and aftertouch over MIDI. So, that's a thing. Hector says, and guys, give me your arguments too. If you don't mind, if I can ask you to help me think, which I need as much help as possible in that category. Don't just vote, please. Give me some arguments, pros and cons. I'm actually not looking at the vote count right now, just to kind of avoid getting biased. I want to hear. Hector says, it would boil down to, if you have to sell one, whether Alpha has 64 feet, 32 feet, 16, 8 feet, 4 feet, and 2 feet. A wider range. I don't believe it does. I think not. I don't think so. I actually don't think it even has a control for range. Just like you do have it. Don't you have it on this one? No, you've just got LFO, PWM, sub-osc, noise. I don't think there's a range on the synth. There is key transpose and an octave transpose, and you've got octave transpose, chord memory too, key transpose up there. So yeah, you could get it someplace else. Cynthypan says, problem is the interfaces are so different, which can really matter depending on usage. Stereo output controller is cheaper from the website, like $300, but no one knows what the tariffs. Also, the value is amazing if you own many scum synths. I'll control them all. I have 9 controllers in one. Yeah, that is the value, is if you have a bunch of scum synthesizers. Mark Anderson says, another shot. Dub says, Alpha for sound design. Adapt says, if all you care about is vintage tone and instant synth wave, the early Junos are the way to go. However, if you were a modern electronic producer, the Alpha is a far superior instrument. I agree with that. That's a pretty good summation. Although I do think the Juno just has a magic to the filter. Yes, it's synth wavy, but it is there, Juno-6 for performance. I agree with that as well. Jerome says, keep the Juno-6, Alex. I swear it's a gem in the long term. It's musically inspiring. But see, here's my problem, Jerome. I have too many classic, iconic, and legendary synthesizers. I'm really running out of space. And I don't want to sell the Prophet 12 if I can sell the Juno-6 or the Alpha Juno or something like that. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to have too many synths that are too similar. Alpha 2 has more. Still haven't looked at the vote yet. Aquatic says, too close in sound character to keep both for me. I would go for the Alpha. Filter is Juno-6 from Dr. Cynthypants. Alpha is a better sound design synthesizer. Did you know 6 has a better interface? MIDI Alchemy says, I think that where the memory is great to quickly change the sonic background, having the Juno-6 to fill in the space where the Alpha is weaker justifies having both. Versatility for the Alpha. Steingrimmer Aranson, welcome. MP2 uses shift left or right for the range. Oh, okay. That's cool. MIDI Alchemy says, I love the Alpha for sound design and possibilities. You must keep both. It's the law. Are these running on Duke Energy or Florida Power and Light? FPL, baby. Clearly the problem isn't how many synths you own, but the size of your house. Synths you own. For me, it's 25 is the number, which is still like a crazy number of synths to own. But I don't want to own more than I can have on the racks and play at once. At that point, I've become a synth hoarder, and that's not who I want to be. No shame on anybody who's got a bunch of synths, but I remember the first time I sold a musical instrument to a guy who really wanted it, and I wasn't using it anymore. It was just collecting dust. And he was so excited to have something that I had kind of been like, it's not really for me. It made me realize, like, it's so important to let gear go. It's great to acquire gear, but you got to let it go too. And if you're not using it, let it go. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm worried about where I'm going to be there. So, Cynthy Pants says, given your collection, Alpha gives you more options and variations. Jerem says, having both, loving both. The Juno just has more soul. Retail slat wall would be, could probably, by selling the stands. Yeah, I've thought about, actually, Standtastic, which makes the stands that I use, you can use the same clamps that I have, or whatever you call, like the things that are actually holding the synths up. On there, they make just like a wall version of it. So you wouldn't even, it would be hard to sell them without those, though, I suppose. Michael Matta says, you'll probably never be able to get a Jupiter 8. Juno 6 is the closest you could get. That or the Jupiter 6 inch, maybe. Increase to 33 and stay there. Huh. Nil says, I love the way the Alpha aliases. It's a designer synth. I do not hear it aliasing. And I've done tests. I don't believe it's aliasing. I think people hear cool, interesting artifacts that you get from the high-pitched oscillators, but I don't believe it's aliasing. Aquatic says, keep the one you really want. You like the Juno 6 magic. Alchemy says, are there sounds that either can do that just decides it's permanent resonance? Yes, that's the case. There's sounds the Alpha can do that the Juno can't, and vice versa. And probably sounds that both of those can do that no other synth. Go to 30. 2 24-channel Mackie mixers. Dubstation's a big fan of those too. Do you enjoy playing one over the other? I really enjoy the instant hit of dopamine you get from the Juno 6. And then I get bored. Then I'm kind of more into the Alpha Juno. And I like where that could go. But then when I go back to the Juno 6, for that brief, like, that window, I'm like, this is the best sounding synth. And then I'm like, but that's all it is. It just, you know, it's a little too blinding lights. Keybed's great on both. Arguably better on the Alpha Juno. It's the same keybed as the D50. I'm not calling you crazy, Nil, but I've done some tests and I've come to the conclusion that it's not aliasing, but I could be wrong. You know, I've been, yeah. Dr. Mix said CS80 or Jupiter 8. I mean, those are the two that everybody would go. Argon 8 is going to go. I could see it. If you got a third wave, Argon 8's not going to be competing on that level. Chris makes the good point with the retroactive, you get that whole thing. The Aftertouch is huge. Okay, I'm going to look at the vote. Are these two synths similar enough that you can't justify owning both? 61% said no, interestingly. So, yeah. Tough. It mingles harshly is a good term. Yeah, there's no doubt that the Alpha Juno is just more flexible. The filter implementation is better. I'm really curious to know if someone could figure out how to mod the Alpha Juno in the way that you can mod a Jupiter 6 to increase the signal to resonance ratio. It would be unstoppable in my opinion. And the Alpha 2 does cover the Juno itch. I agree. I'm not saying I'm not making a hard decision tonight. I was hoping I'd be able to. I was hoping I'd be able to go, okay, you know, those synths are, you know, the Juno's just so close. I will say this. Has anybody changed their mind about these synths? I mean, I know some of the scum in this chat. Can I get one more cheers for my scum out there? I'm going to give it a nice little cheers here with this hot tea, but I love you guys so much. Cheers. I knew the Alpha Juno was probably going to be fucking fire. And it is. It's really great. And who cares about the lack of a self-resonant filter as Adapt says, but I will say, yeah, the Juno 6 magic, Aquatic is right about that. But the Alpha Juno does some really cool sounds. Mentasm, yep. Conveyor belt, oh, that would be so cool. to have like a conveyor belt synth stand where it just like kind of constantly moves. I've changed my mind many times too. I really went into this one thinking the Alpha Juno was going to just basically be a replacement of the Juno-6, and in some ways it is. Like, the oscillators are goddamn identical as far as it, sounds. As close as it could ever need to be. It is splitting hairs, I think, Brett. It is one thing I can say about the Juno-6 is there are other really great filter synths that I have in the room, obviously, with the Polaris, Andromeda, Matrix 12. Even the Modulus, I think, has that magic in it, So from that perspective, there's something. I've got a Super JX. At some point, I'm going to do a comparison between the Alpha Juno and the JXs and try to kind of nail that down. So that could potentially throw it in, but then again, JXs don't have PWM. The Alpha Juno does, and it has SAW PWM as well. So even if I, in the future, Verkoven modded a JX10, would it give me everything I want? It's hard to say. I would get more money selling the Juno-6. Changed my heart. The closeness was surprising. As far as recommending to anybody to buy a Juno-6 when even with the programmer, the Alpha Juno is so reasonable, I wouldn't do that. I would just say get the Alpha Juno. It's amazing. It is amazing. And it can go really cool places that the Juno-6 can't, And then when you want that's just the synth wavy thing, most of the time the Alpha Juno is going to be more than sufficient. And, maybe there's sometimes the Juno-6 would sound better in a use case, but, Mata says, ultimate layering synth. I will say the J6 is at an all-time low. For sure. I got a question, guys. I think I'm going to ask it in the members section. But I'm going to put it out there into the universe, and then you guys say, are you guys good? Whoa. Stepped on that thing. It always triggers that compression. I'm sufficiently happy with shooting out the Juno-6, but it occurs to me that it might be interesting to some people to hear how the Juno-6 compares to the Kwai SX240. And I think Dubstation pointed out it would be interesting to hear the Juno-6 versus the AX60, right? So those are either a DCO synth that has more, without a doubt, the Kwai can do more because it's got another oscillator, plus it has a sub. But it could be interesting too. That could be revealing if there's a little magic in the Kwai that makes the magic in the J6 not sound as unique. And then the AX60 would be like the ultimate underdog because it's a very stripped down synth, but it could be interesting. MIDI Alchemy, I do not believe you can fade or morph between patches. And the reason I don't think it really will ever be possible is because that CPU cannot handle program changes of like more than one parameter at a time. It's never a problem. It's not glitchy when you're doing one parameter at a time, but if you were trying to modulate a bunch of stuff, you would get stutterings. So there's no way to do a really clean version of that. It's just the nature of old CPUs, processors. Maybe when I'm old. I'm hoping that when I'm old, I'm like so snotty about sound design that I would balk at wanting a simpler synth. I love a complicated synth when I could use it. Like the D50 is complex, but I think it's the best. But it would be interesting to try the Juno-6 versus the AX60. I just think I wouldn't want to do the AX60 dirty, right? Because I think it's a great synth. But I do suspect it might struggle to sound good against the Juno-6 just because that synth is more about filter FM and stuff, which I love, but So anyways, guys, I think that's a good place to call it. God damn it, I love you guys so much. This was a good one. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun on this one. I hope you guys did too. I hope you find these streams valuable in some way. fun. I like listening to the synths. I know I talk a lot, but I really do try to keep it down to like just the fax jack. But you know, I can't, there's only so much I could do about that, I suppose. The CS70M does, and Aquatic, your response to it too keeps my mind sharp on it, where I'm like, I really appreciate that synth, just always sounds good. So if you guys are interested in it, I will post a poll in the member section asking you guys, should I do a Kawai SX240 versus the Juno-6, AX60 versus the Juno-6, or if you've had enough Juno-6 content and just want me to focus on something else. Regardless, before we get back to the Juno-6, I will do. Continue to be excellent, guys, and I will see you next week.